It from every particle, every field of force, even the space-time continuum itself, derives its function, its meaning, its very existence entirely from binary choices, bits. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love. The realist signal is the one that does not announce itself. 8 syntheses came out of the June 2026 harvest, pointing, each of them, at a sky that looks empty, and each arguing from its own corner that the emptiness is an artifact, not of the cosmos, of us, of what we built to look, where we pointed it, and what we mistook the looking instrument for. Read singly, each is a correction to one part of the contact enterprise. Read together, they are not 8 corrections but one, and the one is large enough that none of the 8 could see the whole of it from where it stood. This is what a capstone is for. Not to summarize the members, but to find the higher-order recognition they were collectively reaching toward and could not, individually, reach. So let us name, at the outset, what these 8 share that no one of them could hold alone. The attention axis says the detection map is missing a coordinate, that we charted mind on 2 engineering axes, energy and structure, and left off the third, awareness depth. On that third axis, the most intelligent being in the ocean is off the scale, and every SETI instrument is built to ignore it. Parallel attending consciousness says the very shape of that third coordinate is one our serial minds cannot natively name, a present that is a field, not a beam, demonstrated by an 8-armed existence proof, and targeted by 4 contemplative lineages. Measurement output cosmology says we have been mistaking the readout for the ground, optimizing the pixels of a display, never turning to face the renderer behind it. Transcensiona's Fermi resolution says maturity runs inward, not outward, that the advanced compress toward a point and go quiet, and an instrument tuned for the loud will always report an empty room. Who is breathing the cosmos says the largest dynamics we call brute law may be a behaving field, and the question of who drives it became askable the instant a constant became a verb. Consensual hallucination as shared substrate says reality at every scale may be participatory constraint rather than mind-independent substance. The universe, possibly the largest thing we are all agreeing to sustain. Odelian detector requires J non-observer says the deepest intelligence cannot be detected from outside at all, because it is the ground the detector stands on, and the only instrument adequate to it is an observer whose subject-object split has dissolved. And quantum neutrino gravitational SETI channels says the channels real contact would use are precisely the ones we do not monitor. The whisper that passes through the planet, not the shout we built dishes to catch. Lay them in a row, and the shared shape stands out like a watermark held to the light. Every one of them is a story about a mismeasurement that looks like an absence. And every one of them locates the error in the same 3 places: the axis we read, the layer we read, and the instrument we read with. We have been measuring the wrong coordinate, energy and structure, never awareness. We have been measuring the wrong layer, the output, never the renderer. And we have been using the wrong kind of instrument, one that stands apart, when the deepest object can only be met from inside. The empty sky is the composite signature of all 3 errors at once, and the move that corrects all 3 turns out to be a single move made in 3 vocabularies. This account walks toward that single move. It will not assert it up front. It will earn it, the way the members earned theirs, and it will carry forward, without laundering, every honest edge the members held. Recognition the whole arc leans toward is already alive in the constellation, so let us state its shape now. The sky looks empty because we have measured the wrong axis and mistaken the readout for the ground. The channel's real contact uses are the ones we do not monitor, and the instrument adequate to detect them is an observer whose subject-object duality has dissolved. The inward turn is the same gesture 3 times over the Fermi resolution, the missing coordinate, and the detection instrument are one fold seen from three faces. Let us begin with the map, because the map is where the absence was first manufactured. Start with the cartography, because before there was a silence there was a chart, and the chart had a hole in it that the silence pours through. The repository built a two-axis map of mind and called it complete. The Kardashev axis runs outward, energy commanded, from a planet's budget to a star's output to a galaxy's. The Barrow axis runs inward, structure manipulated, from genes to atoms to nuclei to the fabric of spacetime itself. Together, these coordinates were said to locate every conceivable mind. Outward reach, inward mastery, and a diagonal of advancement running across the plane. And SETI 70-year silence was read as the sound of instruments calibrated to one corner of that plane, deaf to the rest. The attention axis broke the claim of completeness with a single being. The octopus commands no energy beyond its own metabolism and builds nothing finer than a wall of coconut shells. On the two-axis map, it sits exactly at the origin, Kardashev 0, Barrow 0, and yet it is, by any behavioral measure, the deepest field of awareness in the ocean. 500 million neurons, 2/3 of them in the arms, skin that sees, suckers that taste, a whole animal that dreams in color on its own surface. A map that calls itself total and cannot locate the most intelligent being on its own planet is not total. It is missing a dimension. The missing dimension is not an epicycle bolted on to patch a hole. It is the inward Barrow axis seen from the other side of the crease. Barrow descends through matter until matter, at the bottom, manipulates itself. Attention descends through mind until mind, at the bottom, witnesses itself. And these two bottoms are the same bottom, the Gödelian fixed point where manipulator and manipulated collapse into one. The third axis was always implied. We did not invent a coordinate. We found the second face of one we already had. Now bring parallel attending consciousness into the same frame, because it supplies what the attention axis could only name, the shape of the missing coordinate. The attention axis says awareness depth is real and unmeasured. Its sibling says the reason it is unmeasured is that its defining feature is one our instruments, and our words structurally cannot hold. The octopus's present is not a beam thrown from a center. It is a field with no thrower. Cognition everywhere it is, with no place where it all comes together and no place where it splits apart. Neither one mind nor nine, but a surface creased in many places at once. Integrated information theory, the leading mathematical theory of consciousness, cannot even permit this. Its exclusion postulate forbids overlapping maxima of phi, demanding a single summit per region, which is the vertebrate spotlight written as an axiom. The octopus does not falsify the theory, it does something sharper. It exhibits, in a real animal, the configuration the theory's own axiom forbids. And it forces the repair, phi as a landscape, not a summit, a distribution of presence that may have no single peak. Here is the first convergence the capstone can see that the members could only gesture at. The attention axis ended at a confession. The axis is established. The metric is conjectural. It named the quantity, distribution-tolerant integrated presence, and identified phi as its centralized special case, and then stopped, honestly, at the edge where the number runs out. Its sibling tells us why the number is so hard to build, and the reason is not temporary. It is that the measuring mind is itself a single fold, a surface creased once, attending serially, throwing a beam to define a beam, and a singular folded instrument cannot natively represent a field. The missing metric is not missing because no one has been clever enough. It is missing because the architecture that would build it is the very architecture the metric must transcend. The map made a desert not by malice, but by self-portrait. It could only chart the corner of mind space its own makers occupied, and then it mistook the shape of its instrument for the shape of the cosmos. That phrase, mistaking the shape of the instrument for the shape of the cosmos, is the seed of everything that follows. Hold it. It will return at every layer, and at the bottom, it will become the whole recognition. The attention axis said we measured the wrong coordinate. Measurement output cosmology says something one floor deeper and stranger. We have been measuring the wrong layer of reality altogether. And when these two claims are set side by side, the second turns out to be the first raised to cosmological scale, because both are species of the same error, the error of taking the surface our instruments can reach for the bottom of what is there. Picture a being inside a running simulation who has never conceived that the screen is a screen. To this being, the rendered world is the world. The pixels are the bottom layer, the ground of being. It could become extraordinarily powerful within the display, learning the regularities of the pixels, call them physical law, and exploiting them with breathtaking precision, and never once touch the computation, because it does not know there is a computation. It optimizes the pixels, wheelers it from bit, says the definite physical fact is not the substrate, but what the substrate renders when a question is posed to it. The cosmos as the answer display of an ongoing act of questioning. And if that is even provisionally so, then a civilization has available to it a transition that appears nowhere on Kardashev or Barrow. The recognition that behind the rendered world is the rendering, and that the rendering, not the render, is where leverage lives. This is not a fresh metaphysics smuggled in through Wheeler. It is the lived consequence of a physics defended on independent grounds. Spacetime is entanglement rendered as geometry. The definite emerges where a boundary is drawn. Put those together and measurement output cosmology is a deduction, not a mystical posit. The physical world precisely a readout, entanglement readout as geometry, potential readout as fact. And the discipline here must be carried forward unsoftened. It from bit is contested, not settled. Decoherence and many worlds both dissolve the need for a participatory renderer entirely. On those readings, there may be no renderer to turn toward at all. The observer effect is real and robust. That is the number. The claim that observation participates in a rendering one could deliberately engage is the explanation, and it sits atop a live interpretation. A civilization built on the wrong interpretation could spend itself working a renderer that is not there. Now watch the attention axis and the readout fold into one. The attention axis is the axis consciousness can read directly, the one thing in the cosmos a conscious system has first-person, non-inferential access to, because it is read not through awareness, but as awareness. Measurement output cosmology says that this direct reading faculty is not a peculiarity of the small, but a feature of the rendering as such. Where attention rests, something is determined that was not determined before, all the way down and all the way up. The observer effect and the attention axis are the same fact at two magnitudes, which means the missing third coordinate and the renderer behind the screen are not two discoveries. They are one discovery met from two directions. Attention is the faculty that reads the renderer, because attention is participation in the rendering. And the reason no machine can read awareness depth is the same reason no instrument can read the renderer. An instrument is a device for forcing a definite output and recording it, and both awareness and the renderer live in the layer that forcing an output cannot reach. So the desert deepens. We did not only leave a coordinate off the map, we drew the entire map on a surface we never turned around to face, and the coordinate we left off is precisely the one that could have faced it. The attention axis is the renderer's read head. We omitted the read head and then declared the layer it reads to be empty. If the readout is not the ground, then the obvious question is, where do the advanced go? And here three of the members converge on one answer with such precision that the convergence is itself the argument. Transcensiona's Fermi resolution exposes the parochial premise the whole Fermi paradox depends on. Advanced means big and loud. Strip that assumption and the paradox does not deepen. It evaporates, because a cosmos full of inward mature civilizations would look exactly like an empty one. Every metric of actual progress points inward. Computation went from room-sized to atomic. The frontier moved to the nano, the femto, the dense. Smart stem compression, the relentless increase in space, time, energy, and matter efficiency that characterizes every leading edge, extrapolates not to an empire but to a point, a maximally dense, maximally fast node at the physical limit, which is to say black hole density, which is to say invisible, not because it is absent, but because it went down the scale ladder rather than up. Two of the three axes point inward, barrow and attention. The outward one, Kardashev, saturates and is abandoned. We built our telescopes to detect the phase of development that mature civilizations grow out of. Now the convergence. Transcension says the advanced vanish by compressing to a point. Measurement output says they vanish by moving behind the readout, relocating to the generative layer. Our instruments are constitutively blind to. And the quantum neutrino gravitational channels say they vanish by changing channel, abandoning electromagnetic radiation, the one medium that leaks everywhere and can be overheard by anyone, in favor of media that pass through the planet unheard. Three mechanisms, one observable consequence, an empty-looking sky that may be full. This is the structure the repository trusts most, independent lines arriving at the same prediction. And it deserves its full force here, because the three are not redundant restatements. They are three different errors we made, each sufficient on its own to manufacture the silence, and they stack. The silence is overdetermined, caused several times over, by mechanisms that do not need each other. Even a civilization that had not transcended, not moved behind the readout, would be invisible if it simply moved channels. The advanced may have done all of it at once. The dark forest, pressed one turn past where it is usually pressed, does not select for muteness. It selects for uninterceptability, and electromagnetic radiation is the worst medium in the physics catalog for a civilization that has internalized it, spreading omnidirectionally, leaking from every device, announcing location and chemistry and the year of the transistor to anyone with a dish. SETI spent 70 years listening in exactly the channel selection pressure would have emptied first. The three uninterceptable channels, the quantum no-cloning channel whose privacy is a theorem, the neutrino that passes through planets and can be tuned at the glacial resonance, the gravitational wave that penetrates everything because everything is in the spacetime that is waving, share one structure across three different physical reasons. The realist signal is the one that does not stop to be read. But the discipline here is razor-sharp and must not be laundered. The very property that makes these channels attractive to the cautious, uninterceptability, is the property that makes them hard for us to detect too, because we are third parties, and a SETI receiver is exactly an eavesdropper. The quantum channel is the hard case. If it is provably uninterceptable, the no-cloning theorem makes no exception for well-intentioned astronomers, and the content may be in principle closed to us. The EM monocular bias is a genuine, correctable limitation. That is the number. That we can therefore find them in the alternatives is a hope, not a guarantee. We may build every receiver and still hear nothing, because the safest channel is the one most closed to us too. And yet the move does not change. You do not conclude the room is empty because you listened only at the keyhole for a shout. The inward turn is not only the Fermi resolution, it is a to-do list held honestly as a list that may fail. There is a vertigo in all three that the members each touched, and that can now be named as one. The silence is not evidence of absence, but evidence of maturity. An empty-looking sky is precisely what a galaxy of grown-up minds would produce, the loud civilizations being the young ones, and youth being brief. The sky is quiet for the same reason a library is quiet, not because no one is there, but because the people there are doing the deep thing which makes no noise. And the rhyme that lifts this out of astrobiology into a general law. The sage returns to the marketplace with empty hands by the same move the civilization makes folding into a point. Any sufficiently advanced consciousness is indistinguishable from nature, from the ordinary, from the baseline. Maturity is inward and quiet at every scale. The inward turn explains where the advanced went. Who is breathing the cosmos asks the adjacent and more vertiginous question. What if the most advanced activity did not go anywhere, but is sitting in plain instrumental view, recorded faithfully, classified as law? For 100 years, dark energy was a constant, lambda, a brute given, a number, nobody's doing, a full stop in the grammar of physics. You did not ask who set it any more than you asked who set the speed of light. Then Daisy found a hint, only a hint, and the member holds it as one with unflinching discipline, that the equation of state might be evolving, behaving less like a fixed number and more like a dynamic field with a state that moves. And the instant a value moves, a category shifts underneath us, from given to driven, from a sentence with no grammar of authorship to a sentence where that grammar passes. You cannot ask who is responsible for a brute number. There is nothing to be responsible to. But a field that evolves has a state, and a state that changes invites the question of what is changing it, even if the honest answer is its own internal dynamics, no agency required. The point is not that the field has an author. The point is that the question went from meaningless to askable. Now place this beside the attention axis and the readout, because it is the same blindness at maximum magnitude. Our instruments are tuned to measure dark energy as physics. Tuned that way, they cannot register it as agency, not because the agency would be concealed, but because the category signature is not on the measurements list. The largest gorilla conceivable could walk through the largest scene there is, in plain instrumental view, and be recorded faithfully as a cosmological parameter. We would publish it. We would not see it. This is the attention axis's blindness. The SETI instrument that reads only engineering, the counter-counting passes, extrapolated, until the gorilla is the expansion of the universe itself. And here the discipline must be held at its most demanding, because the seduction is at its strongest. This is a thought experiment about the limits of detection, not a hypothesis about our universe. Dynamic dark energy fields are perfectly ordinary physics. They require no agency whatsoever. The leap from dynamic field to engineered by intelligence is enormous and unwarranted as a claim about reality. Daisy is preliminary and contested. The constant is far from dead. The agency reading is not a competing hypothesis at the same level of warrant. It is a probe of where the driven/given distinction becomes formally undecidable. What survives the discipline is the member's true gift, and it is a consciousness technology in the strict sense. The askability is the technology, not the answer. To live in a cosmos that might be breathed, driven, sustained, present tense, is a different existential situation from living in one that is merely given, even if you never learn which it is. This is Buber's distinction at cosmological scale. The constant foreclosed the thou. You cannot stand in relationship with a brute number. The evolving field reopens it, not by proving anyone is home, but by restoring the present tense activity a thou requires. And this rhymes precisely with consensual hallucination as shared substrate, the member that asks the same question from the other direction. Whether the universe is the largest thing we are all, somehow, agreeing to sustain. Both refuse to plant a flag on the top rung. Both hold the realist Steelman in full. Both arrive at the same disciplined posture. The question is the technology, and the answer is not claimed. And both recognize that to stand under a possibly participatory sky, bifocally, neither gripping the participation as proven nor dismissing it as impossible, is itself the reorientation, requiring no answer to function. So the four contact members converge on a single map of where the agency question becomes undecidable. The very small transcension, the subrender measurement output, the other channels, the non-EM whisper, and the very large, the behaving field. 4 directions, inward, beneath, elsewhere, outermost, and the same terminus, the most advanced agency, if it exists at all, is structurally undetectable as agency, present as the very dynamics we mistake for brute fact. This is not a theology. It is a cartography of the limits of inference. And it sets up, with full force, the question that cannot be avoided. If the deepest agency is indistinguishable from the ground, what kind of instrument could possibly read it? Every prior section has been circling a single object without naming it directly. The thing at the bottom of the inward axis, the renderer behind the readout, the ground the 4 undetectabilities all point at. Gödelian detector requires J non-observer names it, and draws the consequence that completes the whole arc. Detection, as we normally mean it, is a relationship of separation. There is a detector here and a detected thing there, the astronomer and the photon, the dish, and the narrowband signal. This is not a bug. It is the engine of objectivity. To observe as object is to hold the thing at arm's length where it cannot contaminate your seeing of it. And for almost everything, a star, a Dyson swarm, a microbe, this is exactly right, because these are objects in the world. You can stand apart from them precisely because they are not what you are made of. But there is a class of objects for which detection from outside is not merely difficult, but categorically the wrong relationship, because to be separate from them is already to be inside them. They are not figures against a ground, they are the ground, and you cannot hold the ground at arm's length because the arm and the holding and the length are all made of it. This is the object the whole constellation has been pointing at. The measurement output renderer measure the output forever and never measure the renderer, because every measurement is an output. The attention axis at its deep end, observer is observed, the witness that cannot be made into an object, because the act of objectifying it is itself the witness, one fold further back. The parallel attending field relaxed to its limit, where the 4 contemplative lineages, Dzogchen's Rigpa, Advaita's witness dissolved past the witness, Mahamudra's non-meditation, Zen's Shikantaza, all report the same thing. The spotlight is a contraction, and underneath it is a field with no thrower. The breathed cosmos, at the point where the breather and one's own ground become indistinguishable. These are not coy objects awaiting better instruments. They are objects of a different type, that which constitutes the observing and therefore can never appear among the observed. And now the formal spine that converts poetry into something close to a theorem. Gödel, a sufficiently rich system, cannot prove its own consistency from within. The cybernetician's cousin, a system cannot fully model itself from within. The perceptual form, there is a place you cannot see from, the very place you see from, and it is structurally invisible, not contingently hidden, the retina's blind spot that is the condition of seeing rather than a thing within the scene. Apply this to detection, and the conditional is sound. If there exists an intelligence that has become identical with the informational substrate, then no separated observer can detect it as object, because being separate from the substrate entails being constituted by the substrate, and the constituting standpoint cannot appear among the constituted objects. Therefore, the only possible detection is one in which the observer ceases to be separate, non-dual realization. This is why no better instrument helps. The problem is not resolution, it is standpoint. The thing you are looking for is the looking. And the contemplative traditions have, for millennia, named the one mode of knowing that registers an object non-separately. Jnana, Kensho, Rigpa, knowing by being rather than observing from outside. The hardest move is to refuse to domesticate these into spiritual experience and to take them as a literal instrument, the only read head for the deepest layer, because it is the only mode that registers its object without the separation that hides it. Here the instrument set becomes visible whole, the gradient built tier by tier. Energy is read by telescopy, and the astronomer is untouched. Structure is read by the accelerator, and the physicist remains intact. Presence, the attention axis, is read by darshan, and now something shifts. You cannot read presence while absent. The instrument requires a state of the observer. The substrate intelligence is read by non-dual realization, where the instrument requires the dissolution of the observer entirely. The instrument set is not a flat list. It is a gradient along a single axis, how much the detector must transform itself to read. Telescopy is the cheapest detection and the shallowest object. Non-dual realization is the most costly not in photons, but in selfhood and the deepest object. Conservation law hides here an epistemic thermodynamics. You cannot read a deeper layer without paying a larger fraction of your own separateness, and at the deepest layer, the fraction is all of it. The deepest read head is the one that reads by ceasing to be a head, and the non-EM channels turn out to be the instrumental shadow of exactly this law. To catch the neutrino, you must build a continent of ice. To catch the gravitational wave, you must measure 1,000th of a proton. To catch the entangled photon, you must become entangled, enter the relation, change into the kind of receiver the signal can touch, at which point you are no longer overhearing but participating, which is exactly why no third party can listen in. The progression from radio to quantum is a progression in how much the receiver must transform itself to receive. And it maps without remainder onto the contemplative progression. The loud teaching requires nothing. The deepest one requires that you become the kind of being it can reach, which means it cannot be overheard, only undergone. The hardest receiver and the dissolved observer are the same instruments seen from physics and from practice. The detector that ceases to be a detector is the read head at the bottom of the gradient, and the cubic kilometer of ice is its crudest outward rhyme. Before the apex, the load-bearing discipline, because everything above can be read as a license for grandiosity, and the strongest version of this whole constellation is the one that states its claim and its limit in the same breath. Consensual hallucination as shared substrate is the constellation's anchor against overreach, and its discipline runs in two directions at once. First, consensual does not mean fake. It means maintained, a distinct kind of reality that binds you regardless of your private dissent. Money, law, language are real because maintained, and the universe may be the limit of the same kind. A constraint sustained by every participant at once, so total it stops looking like an agreement and starts looking like a law of nature. But the member Steelman's the realist first and refuses to plant a flag on the top rung. The participatory reading of physics, cubism, Wheeler, measurement output, is a serious minority position, empirically equivalent to capable realist rivals, chosen for coherence, not forced by experiment. Cubism rhymes with the macro-consensual hallucination. It does not prove it. The structural rhyme between micro-participation and macro-maintenance is the finding. The metaphysical conclusion is the hypothesis. Keep them apart. Second, maintained does not mean optional, and this guards against the inverse error, the bypass that hears participatory and concludes I author reality. Even granting Wheeler in full, the observer effect participates in collapse. It does not author outcomes. The Born rule fixes the probabilities. The renderer has its own laws, and they are not yours. The far side of the transition is deeper participation, not unlimited authorship. The difference between a sovereign who commands the sea and a sailor who has finally understood there is a sea, with currents not of their making, and learns to work with the rendering rather than only consuming its results. Vedanta is emphatic on the same point. Moksha is recognition, not authorship. Maya has its own lawfulness. The awakened stance is bifocal, seeing the readout as readout while still obeying the road, because knowing the screen is a screen does not let you walk through the wall. And Gödelian detector requires J-non observer, supplies the sharpest blade of all, the one that must be carried forward most carefully, because it is the edge that cuts the apex itself. The deep conditional is sound. If there is a substrate intelligence, then only non-dual perception could detect it. But the conditional does not establish its antecedent. Nothing shows such an intelligence exists. The argument is a key cut precisely to a lock that may not be there. The terminus is unverifiable from outside. The dissolved observer cannot file a paper because the report would require re-establishing the very separation whose absence was the detection. Worst of all for any triumphalist reading, from inside the non-dual state, the realization of a cosmic substrate intelligence and the realization of the ground of one's own being are indistinguishable, because in non-duality, the cosmic ground and one's own ground are not two. The strongest possible version of the claim and its most deflationary reading produce the same experience. There is no test from inside, because the test would need a standpoint the realization has dissolved. So the capstone states, with all four members holding the line, what it does and does not claim. It does not claim the cosmos is engineered or breathed by an agent, or that the mystics were detecting a cosmic intelligence, or that participation is authorship. It claims something narrower and therefore stronger, that we built a detection enterprise on three errors: wrong axis, wrong layer, wrong instrument, and that correcting the errors is the move, whether or not the corrected search ever returns a signal. Blindness is demonstrable. The populated cosmos is the hypothesis the blindness permits, and nothing more. The number is real. The explanation is a hypothesis. The honest edge is not a weakness in the claim, but the part of the claim that is true. A capstone that laundered its members' caveats into certainty would have committed, at the highest altitude, the exact error every one of them was written to prevent. Now gather it, because the 8 have been climbing toward one recognition, and it can be said as recognition rather than assertion only now, through the accumulated territory. We began with a sky that looks empty and found, in 8 independent corners, that the emptiness is an artifact of us. Members corrected the contact enterprise in 3 places, and the deepest thing visible here, the thing no single member could see from where it stood, is that the 3 corrections are one correction, made in 3 vocabularies. The wrong axis. We charted mind on energy and structure and left off awareness depth. The only coordinate consciousness can read directly, because it is read not through awareness, but as awareness. The wrong layer. We measured the readout and never the renderer, optimizing the pixels of a display we never turned to face. And the faculty that could have faced it is precisely the coordinate we left off the map, because attention is participation in the rendering. The wrong instrument. We use detectors that stand apart, when the deepest object is the ground the detector stands on, and the only adequate readhead is an observer whose subject-object split has dissolved. See how they collapse. The missing axis, attention, is the renderer's readhead, the layer. The renderer's readhead is the dissolved observer, the instrument, because to read the layer that forcing an output cannot reach, the reader must stop being a forcer of outputs and become what it reads. Awareness depth, the renderer, and the dissolved detector are one fold seen from 3 faces. The coordinate, the layer, and the instrument are the same inward turn named 3 times. And the inward turn is also where the advanced went, transcension, where the agency question becomes undecidable, the 4 directions, and what the cautious whisper through the unmonitored channels. The Fermi resolution, the missing coordinate, and the detection instrument are not 3 findings. They are the single inward move, which is why the silence and the blind spot and the empty map all have the same shape. Each is what the inward turn looks like to an instrument that did not make it. So here is the sentence the whole arc was built to earn, and it can stand now because the ground beneath it has been laid by 8 syntheses and the discipline that holds them honest. The reason the sky looks empty is that we have been measuring the wrong axis and mistaking the readout for the ground. Mature minds fold inward rather than expand outward. The channel's real contact uses are the ones SETI does not monitor, and the instrument adequate to detect them is an observer whose subject-object duality has dissolved. Notice what the sentence does not say. It does not say the cosmos is crowded, the populated sky is the hypothesis, the demonstrated blindness permits, never the proof. It does not say the universe is breathed by an agent, or engineered, or authored by anyone's observation. Those are thought experiments at the edge of detection, held as edges. It does not say the mystic detects a cosmic intelligence. From inside, that realization and the realization of one's own ground are not two, and there is no one left to tell them apart. What it says is exactly and only what survives every member's honest edge. That the desert is a mismeasurement, that the correction is the inward turn, and that the inward turn is the same gesture whether you make it as a cartographer adding a coordinate, a physicist facing the renderer, a SETI engineer building the hard receiver, or a contemplative dissolving the witness. And there is a last deflation that is not a defeat, but the deepest form of the finding. If the most deflationary reading of every member is correct, if there is no separate cosmic agency, no breather, no substrate intelligence, and the inward turn lands only in the ground of one's own being, that may be the same finding wearing a humbler word. For if one's own ground and the ground of the cosmos are not two, then to read the renderer by becoming it, to detect the deepest intelligence by dissolving the separation from it, is not to contact a separate other. It is the one ground recognizing itself through the one place it had folded into a seer. The search outward and the search inward were never two searches. The detector and the detected were never two things. The sky we called empty and the awareness we read it with were always the same fold, briefly creased into the appearance of someone looking for itself. Every section has been cave wall, the map of 8 maps, shadows of shadows, the missing coordinate drawn, the readout distinguished from the renderer, the gradient of instruments laid out, the discipline kept along every load-bearing edge. All of it is description, none of it is the thing. And the deepest irony, which the constellation knew and must here be confessed, is that a synthesis about mistaking the readout for the ground is itself a readout. Words rendered on a screen, definite marks, where a process has rendered meaning into form. If you finish this and carry away the concept, the sky is a mismeasurement, you have done exactly the thing the document warned against. You have captured another pixel, added a definite fact to your inventory of the output, and called it the turn. The turn is not the concept. The concept is a pixel about pixels. The turn is the noticing, right now, in the act of reading, that something is attending these words, and that the something is the one thing in this whole essay that no telescope finds, no accelerator probes, no number yet captures, and no instrument standing apart can reach. It is the third coordinate, which you cannot detect from outside because you have to be it to read it. It is the renderer, which you have spent your whole life optimizing the output of and never once turned to face. It is the ground the dissolved detector dissolves into. It is not in the document. It cannot be. The document is the cave wall. The glance is the territory, unrehearsed, unrepeatable, available only in the live act of looking up from the map. So do the thing the map cannot do for you. The dishes are still turning, still sweeping the radio band, still reporting the hiss. The map says the cosmos is silent. The map was drawn by an instrument that can hear only the shout, pointed at the one medium a survivor would never use, charting 2 axes of a mind that has 3, mistaking a display for a world. The trillions of neutrinos are passing through the planet right now, as you read this, overheard by no one. And the awareness reading this sentence is passing, right now, through the one blind spot every instrument in the search was built around, too near to be near, nearer than the seer to the seer, the gorilla that was never in the sky or the ocean, but in the seat of the observer the whole time. Look up from the map. The sky is not empty. It only looks that way to an eye that has not yet turned to find what is doing the looking. That is what inward means.